You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And of course, over the May the 4th weekend, which is officially now, I guess it's official, Star Wars Day. And then, of course, we were live with you guys on May the 5th because we couldn't be with you guys on May the 3rd. And so, consequently, we did our whole show then. But in honor of the whole May the 4th weekend, we wanted to talk about the Phantom Menace and look back on that because over the weekend, they actually re-released it in theaters. And in fact, there were limited theaters that even did a whole marathon of like all 9 films, which would have just been, I mean, we did the one where it was 7 because The Force Awakens is being released. So they showed all 6 films. And then, of course, they premiered The Force Awakens. And that was, that was crazy. That was, how many hours was that? Like, I mean, the whole saga, I guess, is 20 hours. Oh, but they took all those breaks, though.
Yeah, are you talking about actual, like, watch time, or are you talking about this?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was, well, no, because that was the thing. Because I remember we got there at 1 a.m., and I think that was when the Phantom Menace started. And then we ended up leaving at 11 p.m. the next night. Mm-hmm. And, yes, I think we figured it out because there was they took about, like, I don't know, it was like a 15-minute, half-hour break or something between each
between each film. Each film, yep.
Yeah, and then they took a
longer break between
the trilogies.
Trilogies.
Yeah, it was a couple hours because I remember we were able to hit Subway and get some much-needed breakfast or whatever. But you're right. I mean, the watch time probably, you know, would have been closer to, I don't know, 10 hours, 11, 12, somewhere in there. Because the runtime for the entire thing, like the marathon, and this is watch time, this wasn't even including, you know, breaks and stuff, was a little over 20 hours. And I had the opportunity, because they did this Friday night, I had the opportunity to get the ticket, but... You know, and it wasn't bad. I mean, they were only charging something like $70 or something. But, oh, man, I don't know. I just, you know what? And because we did that in like 2015, you know, so that was almost like 10 years ago.
Right.
So I'm like 9 years older now, you know, and it's just sort of like, you know,
it's just quite the same juice in the legs.
It was like just one of those. Well, and it's not even that. Like physically, I don't think it would have been a problem. It's just like the patience to do that now. Like, I find myself just thinking, you know what, I'm good. If I want to do it, I got a pretty big screen at the house. I can run my own marathon, which, of course, I didn't end up doing. I ended up binge-watching Reacher, actually, which is an amazing show, by the way. But the other thing that they did, so it was a limited theaters. Like, I think there was only one theater around us that actually did the full-blown marathon. Everybody else, though, actually did this whole like 25th anniversary re-release of the Phantom Menace. So there was a couple of things that we were looking at because around this time, a friend of mine on Facebook actually posted this whole thing about the Republic maybe being the true villains of this whole thing. And the Separatists were actually the good guys in a sense. And I'll actually read the post verbatim. And then we can talk a little bit about that. But I want to start off by, you know, the whole Phantom Menace, right? Now, we did a review on this thing not too long ago as part of our What Is Star Wars. We actually reviewed the film. So this isn't going to be so much of a film review, per se, as much as it is maybe looking at the Phantom Menace 25 years later. Was it really as bad as everybody thought back then? You know, now that we're looking through a little bit of a different lens, you know, how is that being perceived? And then, of course, how is the prequel trilogy being perceived now that enough time has gone by? You know, so we could focus on that a little bit. So, I mean, what are your thoughts essentially on the Phantom Menace?
Oh, man. I mean, like I said, you take me back to like 1999, man. Like I remember, you know, being that that kid, I was in high school, just feverishly awaiting to see, what this was going to be. Because for me, this is my first theatrical experience with Star Wars. Like this was my first, and in real time, shall I say? Like, I mean, I saw they did the re-release of the original trilogy in the theaters with the special editions. Was a
'97.
few years.
Yeah.
97. So a
Yep.
few
It's
years
2 years
before that.
earlier. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I remember checking those out, and I just remember how awesome it was just to see the special editions in the theater, because I was just like, wow, seeing a Star Wars that way, almost how you did when you actually saw them being released, like I said, in
Yeah.
real time. So this is my first foray into seeing Star Wars on a big screen, brand new for the first time, having that anticipation, wondering what the story is going to be. And I get into the theater and I'm like, okay, the trailer had me hooked. I remember I saw the first images of Maul, with the double bladed lightsaber. I was trying to figure what that was about. I thought he was originally Prince Zizor. That's what I thought it was. And then, so I just, walked into the theater, and I knew it was the origin story of Darth Vader, of Anakin Skywalker. And I was kind of like, well, why do we have him as a little kid though? Like, are they really going to maybe they're going to quickly go through his childhood and show us how he got to become Darth Vader, like really fast?
Yeah, that's what they should have
We-
done. Now you're bringing up the first problem.
But yeah, so going to see it in the theater, man, I was just like, blown away. And for me, I was blown away because I was still a kid. So I was just happy to see Star Wars, to be honest with you. Like, I was happy to see Star Wars on the big screen. It more or less kind of felt like a newer version of Star Wars, just due to um the graphics. It didn't look obviously it didn't look like the lived in universe. But yeah, I just looked at it and I was just like, man, this is pretty awesome. This is pretty sweet. And it wasn't for me, it wasn't until later till I really realized kind of how an abomination it kind of was. Once I got a little bit more maturity and understood film and technology and movies a lot more, because at that time I was what
14
14,
maybe.
14, yeah, 14 years old, maybe when the kind came out, or about to turn 14, because it came out, I think it came out in May
Yeah, you
of
might have
99.
just turned
So
14.
I might, depending on when it was released, I might have just turned 14 or almost was about to turn 14.
Mm-hmm.
So anywho, so for me, like my experience as far as like, understanding what Star Wars was, like, you've actually had a chance to really grow with it. I didn't have that chance necessarily just as of yet to really grow with it to that extent. So I was really, excited about it. And I, loved all the new lightsaber type stuff. They were doing flips and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I was all about it at that time. It wasn't until later on I kind of started to see, like, why does everybody hate this? And I'm like, okay, I could kind of understand. As I started to grow, I said, okay, I get why.
Yeah, well, what's funny about that too, and this is going to be one of those. I think this is really going to be one of those shows where our little tagline with the old two fans, two generations thing really is coming into play here, because
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of the things. It's a lot of the similar things that you felt, a lot of similar emotions and everything else, but probably just a little bit more so because, like you said, I 1977, man, I was there
Yeah.
watching it for the very first time in a theater. So, I mean, I was that original generation for which this was actually made. And so the funny thing about that perspective was, much like you, even though it's funny because it's so similar, because in your case, it was a little accelerated because a couple of years before you experienced, obviously, the original trilogy again, but this time in theaters. And it sort of gave you a little bit of that. From my perspective, though, it was like, okay, I had seen it theatrically, obviously, upon its original release, each one of them.
Yeah.
I had the experience of, the long lines and just the whole hype and the mayhem, and seeing this for the very first time. I mean, it's really interesting to actually say that you lived and have clear memories of a time before Star Wars. Like, what the world was like before Star Wars.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
true.
I remember when
Yeah.
Jaws was released in the theater, so there's a little bit of that, but I say that because obviously, yeah, the original theatrical run of the original trilogy, followed by 1991, the expanded universe is born with the Timothy Zahn trilogy. So I have all this content, and then of course Lucas announces like, "Hey, we're gonna release a new trilogy. Here comes the first movie." Now you're just like your mind is wandering. You're thinking like, "Man, with this technology now versus what they had back then, what are they gonna
Hmm.
do?" I mean, your mind is just like,
Yeah.
it's expecting this crazy experience and just the actual effect of a new Star Wars film and story and not knowing what to expect because much like you, of course, I was in line for the re-releases as well because the special editions did have a lot of extra footage. But what makes
Hmm.
it interesting though is this is the first time where you don't really know where it's going. Now,
Yep.
that was even more so true for the sequel trilogy because at least with the prequels, you knew where they had to end up. You knew a
Yeah.
little bit of the story. You knew about Obi-Wan and Vader and, kind of how Anakin
Yep.
and Obi-Wan were friends. And I mean, you knew kind of the outline of the whole thing. You just didn't know how they were going to
How we're gonna
fill it
get
in.
there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's almost like if somebody described to you a comic thing or whatever versus actually seeing the comic itself. That's sort of what it was like.
Let me ask you this question: do you remember how you found out Phantom Menace was actually being made, or being made number one? Then actually, like, do you remember that moment?
Mm. There's actually kind of a funny story, and I've mentioned this on this show periodically. Maybe not a whole lot, but at least on a couple of occasions. I've been trying to find this. Anybody out there remembers this? Let me know because some people think that I'm making this up, and I'm totally not. I remember there was a Starlog magazine that was released around 1990, maybe 89, somewhere in there. And it was these test shots where Mark Hamill was actually in a Darth Vader helmet, and he kind of had like this little Nazi salute type of thing going.
Hmm.
And it was like, I forgot, like Anakin pledges to the Emperor or something. Like they were actually toying with the idea of having Luke going, or Mark Hamill going back and I don't know, he was supposed to play Anakin. I don't even know what the context was. I just remember seeing this, and that was the first buzz that you were hearing about prequels. And then the next
Hmm.
time I heard about it, I think if I remember correctly, my timeline could be off because so much Star Wars stuff has just happened. Then of course the internet exploded, and now in a
Hmm.
way it's hard to go back and think about this. But I remember around 1995, that's where a little bit of a buzz started going that, hey, the rumors were swirling that Lucas might actually be making this trilogy. It wasn't, and I'm trying to remember when the confirmation came because those movies take like 3 years to make.
Hmm.
At least they did back then.
Right.
It's funny when you do it right, they actually take a while. But it was around maybe 94 even that I started hearing rumblings about it. But it was funny because much like you, sitting in the theater just and then, I was with my mom actually. I took my mom to see it because both of my parents were big fans. I don't know what my dad was doing. And it was killing me because this is another thing I remember. I was because it came out in May, as you know, when we worked for that particular school district, that was
Hmm.
when all the spring concerts hit.
Oh man,
Yeah,
yeah,
for like every school. So
yeah.
the movie's released, and I'm in the middle of this just insane, like all the evenings are tied up, everything for
Yep.
like 4 days. The movie came out like I think on a Wednesday, and Wednesday hit, Thursday hit. I had my friends like, "Hey, did you see it yet?" And I saw it, and and I'm like, this is just killing me. And I finally got to see it. I think like on I don't know, Saturday afternoon or something. I think I took my mom and we ended up seeing it. And I just remember sitting there, and of course, you had that like that big fanfare and the Star Wars comes through. I remember getting like chills because it was just so emotional. And I think that this goes into why at the time the prequels basically, especially the Phantom Menace got hit hard because I think the expectations were the highest for that one. Once the Phantom Menace hit, you sort of knew what you were getting with Attack of the Clones a little bit. I mean, there was probably still a little bit of hope, and people like, well, you know what? Maybe the next one will be cool, right? And then, of course, that gets criticized. But the Phantom Menace, everybody's imaginations were running wild, and I remember everything. I remember how I felt, watching the opening scene with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and all that stuff with TC-13, and I mean, I remember all this like it was yesterday, but the interesting thing about it, as far as what I felt about it, it was like I knew that it was an inferior film. I didn't think it was bad. Like, I didn't dislike it, but it wasn't the original trilogy. But the problem was I wasn't emotionally ready to say that out loud, right? So I kept trying to, I don't know, it was full apologist mode, right? I was, a lot of people were going, yeah, man, it was good. It was okay. And I knew it wasn't the original trilogy level quality, but at the same time, I was almost trying to convince myself that it was. And I mean, I took a bunch of people to see it, because Jim, I introduced Star Wars to him, and I said, well, I mean, sure, you could go back and get, the videos or whatever, but why don't we just go see episode 1, and then you could just, do it that way. Just watch them in chronological order. I mean, he's going to have to wait like 6 years to complete, that. And I think what he ended up doing was watching The Phantom Menace and then going back and watching 4, 5, and 6. But yeah, I just remember that I wasn't overwhelmed by the whole thing. And again, like I said, for you guys, a good companion show to watch with this one would be our review of The Phantom Menace. Because I can honestly say that I don't think that either one of us today, again, this isn't like a full-blown review of the movie, but I don't think anything that you and I are saying today is really going to contradict anything that we said during that review. Because we basically have been saying the same thing. Really good story, really good characters. It just, the execution, the direction, Jar Jar. Yeah. It's like, that's the stuff that, maybe not so much,
Yeah. For me, the first time I even knew that Star Wars was hitting the scene, I remember watching, I was at home, and the news came on, and oftentimes I'll poke my head in because my grandmother loves to watch the news. That was always her thing. Like, had to be there. 6 o'clock news comes on. She has to be there. And 6 o'clock news is popped on, and I remember the news like, yeah, they had the first look at the new Star Wars movie, and I'm like, huh? New Star Wars movie? What do you mean? Because like you said, Eric, the internet was around, but it wasn't as robust as it was as
right.
It is, today. So, I wasn't really going on looking up news and stuff like that. I mean, I was 13 years old, I'm looking up music lyrics to my favorite songs. That's basically what I use the internet for.
Well, and and again, this is where I think that 2 generations thing comes in, right? Because for you at that point, because you had seen the original trilogy on VHS at the time, because your uncle introduced you to it, it probably wasn't until the prequel trilogy that now your fandom was complete, as it were, to quote a line. Where it started to really cement with you, like, hey, I'm really into this. I think at that time,
absolutely,
it was something you liked, but you weren't. That's where I was a little bit different, was because, obviously, I had the figures that I was playing with and all this stuff. I mean, I was like Star Wars obsessed when I was a kid, and then through the novels. And one of the things that happened during that 8-year period of the expanded universe before the prequels came out was that what that actually did, I think Lucas's original intent was to have the expanded universe sort of, satisfy the fans so they would stop bugging them for more films. But I actually think it had the opposite effect, because now you're seeing these, these authors writing these fantastic stories, and you're like, man, I actually want more of this. Now I want more Star Wars, and I think that I was, because again, like you said, back then we got our news mostly, honestly, from magazines, things like Entertainment Weekly or, maybe Sci-Fi or Starlog or some of these other like sci-fi based magazines or movie magazines. That's where it came from. Now, if you're talking about where was I first aware of the actual trailer? It was because it just occurred to me in your answer that it's like, oh wait, because I mean, it first came on my radar that they were making it, like I said, back in 94, 95, somewhere in there. But as far as like the trailer, they had announced it. Well, first they had announced that it was going to be, what was that movie? It was like Star something. Starfield or Star. If you guys know, no, it wasn't that. Although that would have been cool. It was Star Commander. I think that was the name of it. It was like some like nothing movie, right? And what ended up happening, this is so funny. They announced, okay, we're going to show the Phantom Menace trailer before this thing. And like everybody, like that movie made so much money because everybody went and saw it because of that. But the funny thing was, 90% of the people,
they left.
Yes, they actually left.
Oh, that's terrible.
So
Man.
I mean, so basically people paid like whatever it was just to see a trailer, pretty much.
A 30-second, well, maybe a minute and a half trailer or something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember when that hit, because I remember seeing that, and I didn't take the bait. I didn't actually pay money to go, because I'm like, all right, man. But you're right, they did actually premiere it before like some news thing or something. I remember it was like a big deal. It was like the television debut of this trailer.
Yep.
And yeah, I remember seeing that. Like you said, I thought Maul was Prince Caesar as well. The pod race thing. I remember that really piquing my interest. So I mean and that's the thing. They did a really good job with the trailer to set you up. Like, okay, this is going to be incredible. Yeah. Let me get to some of these chats, because people have been. We even have some Twitch chats today, which is I know, right? We almost like never. We get people watching us on Twitch, but for some reason they don't usually chat on Twitch. So first of all, David, of course, hello, gentlemen. It's Star Wars Day, best day of the week. Yeah, I can't say I disagree with that. And here we go. We start with our Twitch follower. Avas VA says, got to watch the 25th anniversary at the age of 25, and the prequels aged like the finest wine. And yeah, that's something that obviously we're going to get into, is how they aged. And I do think that you're seeing, and again, seeing this at the age of 25, right? Again, I think that makes a difference, because what's happening is a lot of people who are younger, who maybe came into Star Wars with either like some of the TV shows that have come out, or maybe the sequel trilogy or whatever. When you actually go back and you're watching the prequel trilogy, people are looking at it differently. Hayden Christensen is getting standing ovations now at Celebration. People are embracing, they're lobbying for Ewan McGregor to continue to be Obi-Wan. You're seeing a real resurgence of prequel love, I guess would be the best way to put it. Now, do you actually feel like it's aged like fine wine? Take your time.
I know, right? Well, no, they hate when I do that. So I'm going.
That's right. That's right. I remember. Who was it? I think it was one of our regular viewers actually that started beating us up because of the dead air. Like, I love you guys, but you got to stop with the dead air. Like, excuse us for trying to think about our
Really
answers
good.
and frame things, but we'll try to be there for you guys.
I'm making it feel like a real conversation, and like real conversations sometimes there are
Yeah,
pauses. But
man. I mean,
anyway,
exactly. No teleprompters here, guys.
yeah. So did it age like fine wine? I would say so. Um, and I'll give it to you in this perspective. I think it started off as a wonderful grape in everyone's mind. You see the like, ooh, big juicy grape of Star Wars about to be released, and then as it's being pressed, and it's like, okay, it's going through the process. It had, and much like wine, it has to have time to ferment, and I think that's what had to happen with the prequels, is that it had to eventually grow on people to realize, the it really wasn't as bad as everyone said it was originally. Made sure, did it have some problems? Absolutely. However, I think overall, if you're looking at if we're just talking about from a story perspective, if we're talking about the advancement in technology, that's another big thing. It's like, you may often hear me refer to, the Phantom Menace was like Teletubby Land, because that's the way like Naboo
Yeah,
looked.
I can't unsee that every time. Every time. And it
you know,
doesn't help that I don't even know why, but there was a period of time in like the mid 90s. For some
I
reason,
remember.
while I was working, I just got obsessed with having the Teletubbies on. And
Yeah,
I still don't know why. But at the time, I don't know.
he doesn't like children, ladies and gentlemen.
It was tripping me out, and it was just, I don't know, it was hilarious to me. It's like watching an LSD trip without actually taking it. But the thing that I
Yeah.
found funny about it though was, yes, as soon as I saw Naboo, I'm like, man, I'm just waiting for that little kid baby son or whatever to just appear out of nowhere, because I mean
In
it
the
just
corner.
looked,
Right.
it was so identical. So identical.
Yeah. But I think, what happened was, over time, people just eventually, um their palates, much like tasting wine, like if you're not a wine, connoisseur, you're like, okay, it's all, but I don't see it was good. Sure, it tasted fine, but I don't understand the nuances of it. It's not until you start to experience wine as you get older, until you start to realize, okay, no, there are differences. I can tell cheap wine from things that are,
Mhm.
actually been around for a while. And
Keep it going
so,
with that metaphor, man. You got a hold of
hey,
it. Just
ride into the sunset.
ride it in. Ride it in. Ride the wave.
Yeah, that's what we do here. So that's kind of what I mean. So I would agree that, yes, I think it has aged like fine wine, because it had to go through the process of becoming a strong film overall, because at one point it really wasn't. And at the time, like I said, when I saw it in '99, I was a 13/14-year-old kid. So I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, or even before now, like maybe say when I was in 30, I can say, or even 25. It's still like, okay, I've gotten a chance to let it grow on me, and I realized, like, man, there was some really cool stuff, some really good innovation that George Lucas did, some really cool storytelling tropes. But as we said before, it was just the execution of it that still
Sure, and the
was the problem,
direction, the
and
wooden
then the
acting,
direction.
the
Yeah.
over-reliance on CGI. I mean, sure, there was a
And
lot
we
of
understand why now, though, and that's the other thing
right,
too. Is like,
right.
I under at least you did, because you were already like, an adult, and you were actually working in this industry, so you already kind of understood why some of the technical problems, or some of the execution problems, why they existed. So, to your point, Eric, like when we're talking about the wooden dialogue, it's because you're not interacting with anybody. That's the first time you got these seasoned veteran actors who are, and this for them is a new experience. And that's the other thing too that a lot of people don't really understand. For Liam Neeson, and Natalie Portman, and Ewan McGregor, people who have been acting for a while, like, okay, this is their first time dealing with a set where you don't have set pieces or other characters necessary to interact with. You just have to make believe that they're there. So it's hard to kind of respond to certain things, or give the performance that you would normally give if you had that prop or that person there. If you you understand what I'm saying.
Oh,
So
completely.
that's
Because I
why
think that,
a lot of people. That's why a lot of people may not understand. Like, why was this so bad? Why does this sound so? And that's why it was new for them too.
well, and that's the thing. That's what I was going to say. I mean, sure, in the age of CGI, the Marvel movies, all that stuff, a lot of
Mhm.
actors have had this experience back then. I mean, Lucas essentially created this. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
like, blue screen stuff like that has been around forever. But I mean, with this whole digital thing and a lot of the CGI stuff he was going to do, sure, they had Jurassic Park and all that stuff. And that was the beginnings of it. But he just took it and just ran with it. And yeah, you had these actors going, okay, I'm in this giant warehouse of green walls, green boxes, and props and stuff, you know? And I'm talking to like a stick. I mean, I don't know. I have no
Mhm.
idea what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't even know how I'm supposed to emote. And, you got Lucas, or they're like, well, you know, I mean, how do you want me to, what do you want? Well, just say the lines, I mean, he's not really giving them anything. So you're in this
Mhm.
completely foreign environment for an actor. And on top of that, you have a director who doesn't really convey what he wants to the actors very well. And that's, I mean, Lucas is known not to be the best director in the world. And so
Right.
I think that's a perfect storm. And that's why I say, look, the problems that the prequel trilogy in general have are still there. But I think that what time has done is it's given you an opportunity to really maybe not overblow them, because you're not necessarily looking at it coming from the original trilogy with those expectations. And you also have to do this too. You have to look at where we are in the story. Sometimes if you have a franchise that has multiple eras or whatever, you might actually favor a particular era or time period or whatever it is. I mean, let's just take the Star Wars universe, because that's, of course, what we talk about here. You have the prequels, you have the original trilogy, you have the sequel trilogy. Of course, we all know the problems with the sequel trilogy are legendary,
Mhm.
but forget the execution and all that stuff and the writing and all that. Just looking at the stories and the time periods in which they take place, it's conceivable that there are people that actually like the prequel era better, just from a story perspective, because they find it more interesting than, say, the time period of the original trilogy, even though the original trilogy, from a cinematic point of view, are superior films. And so
Well,
I
mhm.
think that that's a big factor too.
The other factor I think a lot of people understand or appreciate is because the prequels, you're dealing with the story. The overall story is of an iconic character slash villain, and you're getting to see how that person came to be.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the sequel trilogy is you don't know where we're going with any of this.
Right.
That's in a sense,
Well,
I
that's,
think
yeah,
like
that's true
the
too.
sequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy is almost had the um had the same task as the original. Because for you in
Mm-hmm.
1977, you guys just came in and said it looked cool on TV. Okay, give me your story. What is this about? And then, of course, you all fell in love with it. And it's like, okay, well, I got to see what happens next. Well, that's the same way we all felt with the sequel trilogy, because we all knew that, like, okay, we knew everything that came before, but we don't know where this is going.
Well,
So that's
kind
what made
of.
it brand new.
Your point, I get it, and from, I think, the spirit of which you're giving that point, I totally agree. However, I would be remiss if I didn't clarify at least one thing, though, because watching the original trilogy, like, we had no idea. At least with the sequel trilogy, you're right. New characters, new setting, and all that stuff. But we have like 6 other movies that have given us the foundation by which we can now explore whatever this is. With the original trilogy, none of that. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
it was
True.
actually amazing that Lucas was able to tell the story that he was, and people, because if you look at, say, the original Dune, not the movies that have just come out, but the one from 84. I remember my dad and I went and saw it, right? Neither one of us had read the books or anything. And I'm like, I don't know, 13 or something. I lean over to my dad. I'm like, what's going on? My dad leans back to me. He goes, I have no idea. I can't even begin to. I have no idea what I'm watching right now. I mean, because you're dropped in this world, but they didn't do a good job of really world building and explaining a lot of the stuff. And a lot of it was really weird and done straight. Now, if you watch, there's a documentary on YouTube. I've said this before, that they actually talk about the making of the original Dune and all the problems it had, and how it almost didn't get made and all this. And when you see that and you see it through that lens, you're kind of like, okay, now I understand. Well, we didn't know. But now you go to episode 4, yeah, sure. There's some things that you're going, yeah, if you fought, with my father in the Clone Wars, what's that? I mean, there's like certain things that you don't have the context for yet. They're like just these lines, but the thing is that particularly with The New Hope, you had a complete story. They did a good job of world building and giving us enough context that we understood and could enjoy it for what it was, and then you can expand on it. And I think that that's an overlooked thing that people don't appreciate in Star Wars, is the fact that not only did Lucas create this, crazy world, with, of course, the help of his team. I mean, let's not forget, it wasn't all him, but at the same time, it was one of those things where they all did such a good job of giving us the context and enough information that we could enjoy it and not necessarily have it be tied to, hey, when I explain this in interviews on the press tour, you guys are going to go crazy over this thing. It's like, no. We need to know this when we're watching the thing. I shouldn't have to have, like, do you have a program that's explaining, all this stuff? Like, I shouldn't need like a guide or something, right? That if I get that later, like we got in the encyclopedias and all that stuff that came out afterwards, great. Totally enriches my experience. All right, let me get to, because we got, these chats are sort of piling up and they're good, and that's why we're able to discuss them. Of course, Ted Adam Green joins us again. He says, when everybody seemed bothered by the whole midichlorian thing, I was just sitting there screaming, Darth Vader built C-3PO. No way, Mr. Lucas. Yeah, I know, man. And look, again, if you guys go back and you watch our review of The Phantom Menace, we point all of this stuff out where it's like, okay. And then, of course, what was funny was, now we're all trying to retcon that part in Empire Strikes Back, where Boba Fett's like going up to shoot and Vader like, pushes his gun down. And now it's because, he sees 3PO there. He doesn't want to hit his old friend. And there was actually a comic where he reminisced a little bit about 3PO during that time, where he saw him and it was actually kind of cool because it wasn't out of character for Vader, but it was pretty cool. Oh, David, this is funny. He said, so, this is Andor? LOL? Not quite. I think that... Has he seen the prequels?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, there probably, at least in the Phantom Menace especially, I would say, there are some maybe Andor-esque things about it. All right. Avos VA. Having grown up with prequels, the prequels is a better trilogy than the original. This probably goes to the point that I was making before. Yeah, I know. It's more entertaining, builds the worldview of how massive Star Wars is. And that's what I'm talking about. That was precisely the point that I made. And he follows it up with this, too. This is part of the same point. Seeing the culmination of the prequels with Duel of the Fates on Mustafar is a top 3 Star Wars moment of all time. And again, I could see where, especially somebody, who's younger, somebody who's coming into Star Wars almost in its totality, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's been there. You're not coming up during particular things. It's almost like a band comes out, doesn't matter the genre of music because it's all the same. And you have that classic lineup, and then suddenly they change a member or two, and then they go on. All right? Now, if you have people that came in with the original or classic lineup, generally speaking, they're going to like them better. If you get people that came into that particular artist or band when the replacement people came in, they tend to maybe lean towards that because people tend to gravitate toward wherever they came in. But I think that I could see the point even. I mean, obviously, we don't agree, but at the same time, I can understand why somebody would actually like the prequels more because if you think about it, they're a little bit more action-packed. You see a lot more of the universe. Like, there's more Star Wars in the prequels. There's also a lot of context. So each one of the movies actually gives you, like, different spots, right? The Phantom Menace is kind of leading up to the Clone Wars. It's kind of like what's happening behind the scenes. Then Attack of the Clones, you get the full-blown, you get a little bit of a mystery thing, like who's Sifo Dyas and, who ordered all these clones, and, like, nobody seems to know about it, and, things are like... Yeah, and things are like, right at the edge, and you get the Geonosis battle and all that. And then, of course, Revenge of the Sith. Now we're turning a little bit more inward. The Republic is starting to crumble a little bit from within. Palpatine's plot is fully coming to fruition at this point. You're seeing the dissolution of the friendship between Obi-Wan and Anakin. You're basically seeing, Palpatine seducing Anakin, turning him into Vader. I mean, there's a lot there if you really stop it. If you look at it objectively and not necessarily from whatever era you came in, not necessarily from even a filmmaking or cinematic point of view, but if you just look at it from a story perspective, I can totally see why people, might feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so to that point, for me, like I said, I started this in 99 when it was released. So for me, I was amazed at, like, okay, you're giving me more in the sense of in Phantom Menace, you got, more action as far as the lightsaber combat. They're flipping all over the place. You're doing more stuff, like just a sense of when Qui-Gon stuck the lightsaber through that blast door.
Oh, yeah, that was huge. I was just like, whoa. I didn't even know it could do that. Neither did the people on the other side of the door, apparently.
So that, we're seeing the expansion of force powers. Yes, we saw the Jedi mind trick that we've seen before. But also we got the whole force speed thing. When they zip down the corridor, didn't know that could happen. So I think there were some things where, and then of course we see the debut of a double-bladed lightsaber coming from Darth Maul, and then of course portrayed by Ray Park and his phenomenal job with bringing that character to life. Even though he didn't hardly say any words throughout the whole film.
Well, and Ray Park himself didn't say any words.
Well, yeah, that too. But the character of Maul didn't really say much. The presence of, and then but the presence of Maul was kind of like, okay, this guy's he's a buck, because for us it's like, okay, how do you follow Vader?
Right.
That's the thing. It's like, okay, Vader is still like the all-time greatest, one of the greatest villains of all time. So how do you follow him?
And let me make a note really quick on that, because I do want to give a little bit of props to the prequel trilogy for creating a couple of Sith Lords in Dooku and Maul that are interesting, right? Because they could have, I mean, in the hands of a lesser storyteller, you would just come up with another proxy Vader, basically, right? You would just try to copy that character and maybe make a, sort of the Wish.com or Temu version of Vader. But they didn't. And it's very difficult to actually come up. Now, of course, we did the show on our top 10. I think it was top 10. It was either top 10 or 5 favorite Sith Lords, which so far only David has seen, because so far that's a members only video. But, and again, I mean, I should just plug real quick that you go to buymeacoffee.com, you can see how to be a member and all that. But it's amazing how many Sith Lords there are. You know, when you really go back and you factor in from like Knights of the Old Republic and then, you know, some of the other comics and all that stuff. I mean, if you just go to StarWars.com into their database, the Wikipedia, I mean, there's like a gang of them. And what fascinated me about it is the fact that the cinematic versions in Dooku and Maul match up to a lot of those guys because it's really easy to create some compelling guy when you don't have to do it in real life. You know, if you don't have to make a live action version, all you got to do is draw them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not taking down the entire visual art industry like, oh, that's nothing. Because still, I mean, to make these guys different from each other, even though they have basically the same motivations, they have the same, you know, I mean, you could just replicate the look almost. I mean, there's just like a lot of things that you could do, and they don't. And with Dooku, you know, you got that more regal, stately, noble Sith Lord almost, you know? And
like
and then
Balin,
of course,
like Balin Skull, you know,
yeah,
basically.
exactly, right. Balin Skull's definitely cut from the Dooku cloth. And then you have, of course, Maul, who's a little bit more like an enforcer. You know, he's kind of like that, you know, second in command.
Weapon.
Yeah, right.
He's more just like a weapon that I'm just sending out to just,
just kind of a blunt, not really thinking, just, you know, brute force, right? Where Vader's a lot more cunning and strategic and, you know, I mean, but still, I mean, they actually did a really good job separating that. So I just want to point that out, that was something in the prequels. And the other thing that I wanted to just jump in real quick was one of the problems with the original trilogy was that, you know, he changed his mind. I mean, in the original trilogy, he was telling the actors, look, these lightsaber things are really heavy. They're like broadswords and all that stuff. And they were responding to it. And then at some point, as the original trilogy went on, you know, he was violating that rule a little bit more. And then they became almost weightless, which makes sense because the Force is helping to guide it anyway. And then you get the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and, you know, all the prequels basically where they're just flipping all over the place, you know, doing these like little twirls and stuff with the lightsaber. And yeah, so, you know, sure, that's going to be more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I just feel like, you know, we were focused kind of like more so on one story for the most part when you're talking about the original trilogy. It's basically, okay, the coming of age of Luke Skywalker.
Right.
All right. So it's like, all right, we have to get him to the point where he can stand up against the big bad evil being his father and Palpatine. So we were pretty much watching the maturation of one guy through different scenarios or different experiences that we see help him grow.
100%.
When you're looking at the prequels, however, you're looking at a galactic version of that because you're literally dealing with the entire galaxy. And we're talking about like, okay, how did the war even begin? How did the Empire even seize control? How did Palpatine ascend? How did Vader become Vader? How did, like we're watching the Force being depleted from the Jedi. We're watching, or how come they didn't see it coming? We're watching the birth of Luke and Leia. You know, we're watching the of course the downfall of Anakin. We're watching of course the continued ascension of Palpatine. We're watching how Padme is, dealing with all of this, carrying, kids and trying to fight for the people. So we're watching a bunch of different stories unfold.
Yeah, downfall of the Jedi too.
Yeah, the downfall of the Jedi, like everything in the rise, of course, obviously the rise of the Sith. So you're watching so many different stories happen almost at the same time.
I would argue, I would argue that the prequel trilogy in particular, and if you think about it a certain way, it's almost Palpatine's story. I know that Lucas himself would argue that it's Anakin's story, and certainly from a certain point of view, you can look at it, but I mean, you just pointed out, like, I mean, I never even really thought about it, but when you really think about everything that's going on in the prequels, there's a lot of stuff, man. There's like it's more macro than micro. The micro is basically in the original trilogy because now you're honing in, like you said, on Luke and his struggle to learn the Force, to deal with his own fears and everything like that, go up against his father and Palpatine, try to turn him back. It's almost like a family type of a story, really. Whereas, the prequels, yeah, absolutely.
Well, you see why, and you understand why Lucas started with the original trilogy first, because one, if you don't know this movie is going to be a hit, you want to tell the easiest story possible. And with this, at that time, the limited technology that he had for his vision of what it should be. And quite frankly, I mean, I think that was like, once again, a brilliant move for him, because he started with the strongest story and then he kind of built the story back the way he's like, okay, well, let me show you how this all happened.
Well, not only that, but, and you and I have pointed this out too, A New Hope is the only movie that's got a definitive conclusion. Like, if that had just been a one and done, that's the one to do it, because it's the only one that you could it basically stand on its own. Let me get to some of these chats. We'll go ahead and finish your point first, but
no, I was just gonna say, I think that's so the world to our Twitch viewers comment, like, I would agree that the world building, yes, is way more massive in the prequels. And I think you get, and this is one of the things we talked about why we hated the sequels, but at least in this, we got memorable music once again. That can't be understated, because once again we're like, okay, in the original trilogy, we got the Star Wars opening fanfare, we got Leia's love theme, we got the Imperial March, we have like some of the
the iconic music.
That iconic music. So, like, once again, can you duplicate that again? Can you replicate it? I should say. Can you replicate those feelings, those emotions that we had with the original trilogy? And once again, John Williams knocked it out of the park when, of course, we got Duel of the Fates being like one of the biggest, songs. That was almost as big as the Star Wars fanfare or the Imperial March combined, because it just has so many different layers to it. And it definitely moved the story.
There's a lot of great,
there's a lot of other great music in that, which makes me think, which also makes me kind of like chuckle to myself, because that's how you know how bad the sequels were, when they even limited John Williams, because John Williams, none of his music really stood out in that movie.
I can't hum a single thing from that.
Exactly. I mean,
it's funny
I can't
too,
tell
because
you one piece of music from any of the three movies that made me go, man, that's awesome.
You'll appreciate this. One of our friends, Doug, he came up to me today. He's like, yeah, my wife and I watched The Rise of Skywalker over the weekend. The movie's terrible.
I can see you, the hero's voice too.
I'm like, I mean, I can't argue with you, man. I mean, it is like it's fun. I mean, it's a fun movie, and there's a lot. There are some things that are cool and that you can enjoy in it. And I told him, I was like, you really should see our review of it in the What Is Star Wars series that we just did last year, because we were the most obnoxious. And I remember I was like yelling. I mean, I remember I was really on that day. I was just more irritated about things than usual. Like, if you go back and you watch our original, because when it came out, we did a review. First we did a non-spoiler one, and then we did a spoiler review. We did that like the first, weekend or whatever it came out. And, we pointed out problems like with the pacing, and some of the stuff was a little too convenient and all that. But man, we went to town on it. Like on this revisit on our What Is Star Wars series. So you guys should check those out. Like, after this, maybe check out the Phantom Menace review and comment and see what you guys think and all that. Speaking of our Twitch viewers, you pointed out, it goes on to say, also between those movies, the Star Wars The Clone Wars filled in gaps between 2 and 3, and to the end of the 3 prior to the Obi-Wan show. And yeah, that's another really good point, right? Is the fact that this is the beginning of support material giving us more context to things that already existed. Now, to clarify that statement, what I mean is the expanded universe did the same thing, but it was never considered canon by George, right? Lucas basically was like, yeah, all right, you guys, that could be like what people call head canon now, right? Like it could be canon in your head, and I'm fine with that. I won't do anything. As long as I don't contradict it in any of my own stuff, you all can, think whatever you want. But what he began to do was create his own vision and thereby his own version of a lot of what happened. And what it did was it started to really, I'll tell you this, the Clone Wars was the first thing that actually made you think of the prequels differently. Like that was the first, I remember you and I talking about that. Like, wow, I actually appreciate the prequels more now. So I mean, that's a really strong point. I mean, the Clone Wars was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to the prequels, other than time, like the 25 years that have passed. Okay, David. David says, the Yoda and Goat, for anybody that doesn't know, that's his little nickname for Palpatine, fight was really good. When Goat started throwing the Congress seats, that was cool. Watching him manipulate both sides was great. Even the actor looks like a snake. Tell you, man, David, I live for your comments. I always miss it when you're not on because I just don't know.
Our world is not right.
Our world it's not right. I mean, the best, I'll tell you, man, I can't wait for Andor season 2 so we can argue with you some more. Because that, I have to say, that was like the most fun. And I'm not really a confrontational person. I don't, but man, it was just like a comedy show. See, that's the thing. I'll tell you what, because David's a member, right? We still have to bring him on as a co-host. Like that's one of the packages for the level that he's at. It's got to be during Andor season 2. We can't waste it on something other than that's got to be the one where he can be with us on camera debating this stuff with us. That's got to be the one. All right.
Well, there you have it, David. It's official. You got your own show.
Avos VA, which I actually now want to lovingly call the Twitch viewer, because that's what we've been. That's what we've been saying. Well, he's the one on Twitch right now that's actually commenting. I wonder what happened to DP Dishy. Remember him?
Yeah.
He used to be like, he used to comment on all our stuff. Yeah, chat with us constantly on Twitch. He says the prequels can be seen as a Sith story. Ooh, try to say that fast. With the strongest rule of two being...
say something else.
Freudian slip, right?
Yeah.
With the strongest rule of two being established, and obviously the original trilogy was the strongest Jedi. That's actually another good way of looking at it, honestly, is that the prequel trilogy was kind of like the Sith story, and then you get the Jedi story, more or less, because that was one of the big themes that was piggybacking on the end of your other point when you were listing all the things that happened. The fall of the Jedi can't really be understated because that's when things really started becoming unraveled. I mean, I love the fact that in Attack of the Clones, you start to see a little, Yoda's like, hey man, we're starting to get a little arrogant here. It's like we got to be careful, but they were still like so just blindsided, like they didn't even see their own undoing, which was, I thought, genius anyway. Let's see, David. Oh, here we go. Mr. Vansel is being harder on this than the trash, horrible series Ahsoka. Oh, that is so not true. No. First of all, I like the Phantom Menace. I was the one guy. All I said earlier in the show was that it just didn't stand up to the original trilogy for me, as far as like the quality and stuff like that. But I still tried and, made my best effort. Now, when I go back, and this is one of the things that now you had the full prequel trilogy, you had the Clone Wars series, now you even have things like Rogue One and Obi-Wan and all that. you start to look at episodes 1 through 6, and that's including all their standalone stuff. I look at it kind of as like a complete story. And when you look at it in that context now, you can go back to the Phantom Menace, and like you and I have said, amazing story. It just had some problems in its direction, execution, some of the dialogue. It's mostly filmmaking stuff. You know, there isn't even like any issues really with the story. I mean, I know some people got bothered with, oh boy, it's like watching board meetings. You know, you got like, what happened to Star Wars? You know, I'm watching like these guys running around with lightsabers, guns. Now I'm watching like a trade federation meeting. What, you know, like I'm watching Congress. It's like galactic ESPN or something, you know, it's like, what's going on?
Meeting.
But again, I mean, those are the things that you and I find really intriguing, like the novel Bloodline. It was a political thriller, but it was incredible. Ahsoka?
Well,
boy, that had some problems. It had some problems. Do you want to say something before I hit these chats?
Well, just real quick, that the fact that, you know, without the politics, because even in the real world, right, the world that we currently live, in which we live, I should say.
You know, grammar, that's good, man. We're going to be a grammatically correct, for the most part, little show here.
But we all know that, you know, wars start usually off of politics and religion.
Yep.
And really, if you really think about it, that's the onset of this, is because you have two religious factions, the Sith and the Jedi, going against each other, and Palpatine is using politics to start the war.
Yeah, it's a good point. All right, so David comes in. Andor season finale. I'm handing out L's. Don't you all owe me a frappa for being right about Ahsoka? We can say, what does he think he's right about Ahsoka?
He said from the onset that Ahsoka was going to suck.
It didn't suck. It wasn't great. You know,
No,
it wasn't.
He's gonna say like you're playing the middle, because he's
no,
gonna say,
I
like,
know.
if it's
No, look, Ahsoka. Well, there was a couple of issues. One, the biggest problem was you had Filoni, who is not an experienced live action director. Great in animation, not so much in live action. A lot of the writing, a lot of the direction was bad. You know, you had some really stupid dialogue. The story was a little disjointed. It's like it had some good parts, but it was enjoyable. It was enjoyable to watch.
So Dave was going to ask you how, though. If you're listing all these major problems, these aren't like just like little, like, oh, okay, well, you know, it was little things that weren't accurate.
Here's the thing. Star Wars as a franchise can overcome a lot of these problems, unlike a film that hangs on them, because you basically have the benefit of, one, knowing these characters. Think about this. When you watch a movie, it's just like a standalone movie, right? Mm-hmm. And you're introduced to, I don't know, a character, John, right? John, I don't know. It's like maybe it's like another, like, you know, 24 or Reacher, you know, those kind of movies, right? It's like some action political thing. And you're introduced to John, and John's a poorly written character, poorly directed. It's not based on a book like Reacher is. It's not based on anything. Your only window to these characters is from the people writing and the person directing, right? Because you could have a well-written character, but if it's poorly directed, it's not going to come off right. And even then, if you have a well-directed movie where, you know, the director really vibed with the actors and he really got a good performance out of them, you can look at it and go, well, you know, the John character was poorly written, but it translated with me because of the fact that it was directed well. Conversely, if you basically have a poorly, or like a well-written character that's poorly directed, you can see through that. But still, you're your window to this character. You know nothing about this character other than what's been presented. When you have something like Star Wars, you have Ahsoka. You have to remember something about Ahsoka, and Ahsoka is a good example because I would argue that if it was a different character, like if it was a new character, I'd be 100% on board with what David's saying. 100%. The fact that it's Ahsoka, though, this is somebody we've lived with since 2005. Right? Mm-hmm. This is a character that's been fully fleshed out in animation. And don't forget that her live action debut in The Mandalorian wasn't bad. You know, it was fine for that character and where they were. Oh, and we also had her in Rebels too. So you have like all this time. So what you could do is you can overlook some of these things because there was a lot of canonical storytelling that was done that was moving the thing forward in a positive direction. There were just some things that fell flat that prevented it from being a good series. So that's, I think, where it's semantics.
And I'm just playing I'm going to speak on the behest of
David,
because I know
David's advocate.
Yeah, I'm his advocate because I know how he's going to respond to this. So, and if I'm wrong, he'll let me know.
Jeez, we don't even need him to call us the show. You could just, I'll put a third box and I'll put you in it. You could be the.
I don't think people want to see two of me. I think one is probably enough. But David would probably say that, okay, all that being said, like about the character, but he's talking about the show in its totality. Like if you're saying that a show doesn't have good writing, if it has terrible acting and it wasn't directed by those standards, how can you say it's good? Or it wasn't, like if the opposite, if it's something is not good, then it must be
because there was enough
bad.
Good. There was enough good parts in it. There was enough good in it. Because if you go back and watch our review, we basically complained about the same thing because we also complained about how some of the writing was actually very good. In fact, there was a couple of episodes that were outstanding, and you and I both said this is probably one of the best that we've seen in Star Wars. It was either episode 4 or 5, or maybe it was both of them. But there was, because it wasn't like in totality. It wasn't like the whole show was like that so much as it was parts of it suffered from that. And so that plus the rest of it, you could say, okay, and the fact that it was enjoyable. Because if something's really that bad, I'm not going to enjoy it. In fact, if it's Star Wars, I'm going to enjoy it less because I'll get angry about it. Because now it's like that George Lucas is ruining my childhood mode that I would sometimes get in. You know, it's like if something is like that terrible and you're actually ruining Star Wars for me, one of my favorite franchises of all time, I'm going to be mad at you. As long as I can still say, hey, I'm enjoying this, or, okay, there was some really bad writing, bad direction here. Oh, the dialogue was a little stupid here or whatever. But overall, you know, I mean, it was just like, I'll give you an example. This is something that we covered at the time that we reviewed the episode. So I'll give you guys an example of what we're talking about, right? There's two things. I'll give you two examples. One from earlier in the series, one from later. You and I both criticize this. This is the example of the kind of thing. Like when that one person came out and was like, for the Empire, and tried to like, you know, okay. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, we don't have enough proof yet that, you know, there's a threat. It's like you just had like this key shipyard that's guarding a lot of these ships. You obviously had Empire, you know,
Imperial,
like Imperial,
or former Imperial workers working there who just yelled out for the Empire.
Yeah, they're just right. You know,
they're still loyalists,
right? That are loyal to the Empire that are actually trying to take you down. You don't really think this is worth investigation. See, it's just things like that, right? Or the fact that if you want to play a really fun drinking game, every time Ahsoka crosses her arms, take a drink, you'll be obliterated like halfway through every episode. You know, things like that. The dialogue, of course, between Ezra and Sabine when they finally meet and they're riding, you know, to storm the Thrawn's stronghold or whatever. It looked like they were reading off of cue cards. I mean, it was terrible. But again, there was a lot of really good, compelling things in there too. Like when Hera was like facing the council, there was a lot of really cool stuff. With 3PO there and everything. There's a lot of really good dramatic tension there. Yes, I thought that they should have actually had a situation where maybe they listened to her. But, that's a storytelling trope. Look at every episode of 24 was like that. It's like, okay, guys, in season 1, this worked. By season 5, if the guy that's been right every single season is telling you something's up, I don't know, maybe listen to him this time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I enjoyed the later seasons of 24 when it was kind of like, okay, oh, well, Jack said this, so we better check it out. Because that shows, like, yeah, the guy that's actually saved you from, I don't know, like 3 nuclear bombs already, maybe listen to that guy. Those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. That's why I could say that.
And I could continue being his advocate.
It's like, okay, wait, am I talking? Hold it. I'm getting something. Am I speaking to Daryl or David right now? You're like channeling him, dude. You're like a medium. This is great.
Well, it's force projection.
A little hologram pops up on my laptop or something. I'll be like, whoa.
But but I think the same could be said about the Phantom Menace, right? And that's why we're here, because a lot of people felt like, the Phantom Menace ruined their childhood, and it ruined Star Wars because it wasn't, like you said, it didn't live up to the expectations or the bar of the original trilogy. And I think over time, people have gotten to see, like, okay, it was much like Ahsoka. It had problems, but there was enough good in it. And I think Phantom Menace had more good than Ahsoka, certainly.
Yeah.
But I think that overall, I think that's why a lot of people's opinion of Star Wars, or not Star Wars, is the prequels, but more specifically like the Phantom Menace, people kind of started warming up to it a lot more, because it's like, you know what? Okay, I see what he was trying to do. I see what he was doing here. It just fell a little bit short, but
and that's the thing. And you're going to get
good.
that. Exactly. You're going to get that from fans of a franchise. Fans of a franchise are going to... It's like if you're a newer fan of the franchise, there's a couple of things that you're going to do. There's 2 ways you'll go when presented with anything from that franchise. Doesn't matter if it's a comic, it's a novel, if it's a film, television show, whatever, right? You're going to look at it, consume it, take it in. You're either going to like it or you're not. But the thing is, you're going to be basing it on how it actually lands with you at that particular moment. It's not going to be the same for people like us who have been in this for the long haul, have all of this story, content, knowledge behind us, have owned all these little encyclopedias explaining how a lightsaber works and where's the bathroom on the Millennium Falcon. Yes, I am that guy. I had all those things, like planets and moons of Star Wars, ships and technology, weapons and, whatever. I mean, all of it, where it's like diagrams, like schematics of a blaster. I mean, all that stuff. When you consume it like that, you're really coming at it with this like really deep understanding, and you can overlook some of the actual filmmaking things, because what you're really going to Star Wars for is the story and to just live in that world a little bit. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's the experience,
and it takes you out of it. Like if it's bad, like the bad things can completely take you out of that. Like some people that are newer might be able to overlook some of that stuff. But when you're well, go ahead.
No, I was going to me and my analogies. I was going to compare it to going to a restaurant. There's 3 phases to it. There's the ambiance of the restaurant, there's the actual food that you receive at the restaurant, and then there's the customer service that you get at the restaurant.
Yeah, 100%.
And
yep.
And so those like usually the 3 major factors that people, grade or base a restaurant on. Of course, you can go cleanliness too, which I file under ambiance, but whatever. So I think which it sounds like what you're saying is that, you know, you may not have all three elements of a restaurant to make you want to go back to it. So the food may have been like, okay, well, the food wasn't seasoned as well, or it came out a little cold, but it was still good. It was still enjoyable. I just wish it would have been warmed up a little bit more. Okay, but I will still come back here because you know what? This is a cool vibe. This is a cool place. The customer service was tight, like the waitress and everybody was so nice and accommodating and things like that. There's just some aspects like, okay, or maybe the food was great, and the customer service was phenomenal, but the ambiance was like, I wouldn't necessarily bring a date here, but it's I wouldn't make this a date night place, but it's cool, it's good food, you know what I mean? So I think that's kind of how we're looking at the Phantom Menace or Star Wars in the sense of determining like, okay, what are we using to measure the success of a particular film and or series, like David was talking about with Andor and things like that.
Well, that's perfect. If I may, I'm going to continue to torture that metaphor
By all means.
because that's a really good way of looking at it, right? Because as Star Wars fans, especially the ambiance type of thing, so what it would be really good is like the perfect analogy part of that is the ambiance and the customer service, and then the food. Okay, so you got all those three.
Mm-hmm.
For us, a new person, if they're new coming to that restaurant, they're going to look at it and decide based on that particular meal, did I have a good experience at this particular meal? And what I reasonably knew, it could either be the first time they're at that restaurant or maybe it's a second or third. They're still not 100% sold on the restaurant, Maybe the first time it was good, and then second time it's like, you know what, the customer service wasn't the best. Then they go back and the customer service is amazing, but the food was like you said. It was good, it just wasn't as good as it was last time. Okay, that's the new Star Wars fan. The Star Wars fans like us, we've been coming to that restaurant for years. We know exactly what we're getting. Okay, but there might have been a new staff that came in. Now, the customer service is great, but, maybe sometimes the food doesn't come 100% warm or whatever, but it's still because we know that restaurant and we've come to love the overall vibe at that restaurant, we're willing to overlook some of these things because we know that it's not going to be about just that one meal. It's about overall, right?
The overall experience. So
yeah,
it's like
because if maybe they had a bad week, right?
totality.
Yeah, exactly. Like in totality, we know, okay, look, it's just like, look, you have a bad experience at a McDonald's, right? Now, some people might go, I'm never going to come to this one again because there's like 30 of them in the area, right? Okay, so there is that. But I mean, overall, look, you know what the food should taste like. You know that if somebody botched it up, like they didn't cook it right or they left off, ingredients or whatever, you're going to be back there the next day because it's convenient and you basically know, okay, it's probably a one-time thing. They just had some teenager that probably had a final or something and wasn't paying attention. It's not going to be the overall thing. And so I think that's a perfect analogy because I think that actually makes a lot of sense. And welcome to Head to Head, a culinary podcast. All right, so Avaz VA, which I really just want to call our Twitch viewer now. I think Ahsoka had good parts but did not make a good story. And that's fair,
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're, I'm still not sure. I mean, just based on the initial comment, I'm thinking, newish fan, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe you've been watching it since. Yeah. I mean, but it's one of those things that, look.
Well, let me, prod your brain here real quick. So so we're talking about story, because it could be said that So it's the story that you got. How did I want? I just had it. It's basically something to the effect of the story that we saw for the Phantom Menace. It's like, okay, was the story good in and of itself? And then do you have the, if it was done a different way, would it still be a good story?
Well, I could even go one step further than that. What if it was done 100% correct? Because that
Hmm.
could affect it the other way too, right? Because we
Yeah.
agree that the story was really good. It like what if he had Irvin Kershner direct it? You know,
Hmm.
what if he had cast
Yeah.
and help him write it, or kind of help write
Hmm.
the sequel trilogy? But under Lucas, though, I think it would have been different. So there's a lot of those things that you can look at and sort of analyze and think about it. And I think that yeah, you would have, and you could also look at it from a flip side too. Is what if you had extremely competent direction, like everything was like spot on, but maybe the story wasn't the best. I actually think it could overcome that because a lot of times the actors could sell you. You know, if you get a good
Hmm.
actor with a good director, they could sell you a lot. Like you have,
Hmm.
these paper thin characters and pretty much a two-dimensional plot, but they could still crank out a pretty good movie out of that if you have that combination. If you don't have that combination, you can run into an issue. And that's why when you flip it over, you have the Indiana Jones series. It's because you had Spielberg as a director, Lucas was a
Hmm.
storyteller and the producer. You had a symbiotic team that way. They got a really good group of actors. So you had great actors, you had a great director, you had great writers, you had probably the quintessential storyteller. That's the reason why it didn't really fall flat that much. Yeah, people argue Temple of Doom maybe was a little bit of a misstep, but that's mostly because it's really dark and people, they weren't ready for that as a second film. Let me see what we got here. Oh, this is great too. He goes, I don't even want to start on the Wackolite.
Yeah.
And we still haven't
Ooh.
really, we haven't reacted to they finally released the full length trailer, by the way. If you guys haven't checked that out on YouTube yet, um, it is interesting. And again, we did, what was it? It must have been the teaser trailer or something that we
Mhm.
reviewed,
Yeah.
that we reacted to. If you guys go back and check that out, you have to check it out on YouTube though. It's like he's on Twitch. Well, actually, you know what? I think a lot of this stuff stays on Twitch. Twitch is one of those things where, because you could cut, you can make clips and all that. You can do that on YouTube too. But it's like I think there's like a shelf life for how long the stuff stays on Twitch, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, you could check that out. All right, and then David, of course, I agree with Daryl about the necessity of the politics. We've seen fights without good contact stakes. Civil War's ending was so good because Captain America hid a secret from Tony. Story made the climax. And yeah, I mean, I would actually argue that Civil War was probably one of the best of the Marvel movies.
Yeah. But I think to that whole point, you need to see like, okay, it's called Star Wars. So like how do we get to this war part? Like
Hmm.
what made how did the Empire like, because we're dropped into this whole thing with the Empire already being in control and you have the Rebel Alliance trying to stop the Empire. Well, why? I
Right.
mean, I mean, outside of this giant planet-sized ball
Well,
floating
that's what I
around
was
that's almost
talking
like a
about.
planet. Like,
Exactly.
why? How do we even get here? And I think that's what made the prequel so special was because you're seeing the setup was with the politics of it all, and
Hmm.
then we start seeing um the shadiness of we started seeing the shadiness of the government. By the Clone Wars, we really started to see like, okay, this is how all this is going on. It's like, all right, he's playing both sides of the fence and he's inciting a war because, and as we all know too, even like I said, in real life, a lot of bills and things get passed during wartime because everybody's so focused on the war, on whatever. We just came out of a pandemic. Okay, there was a war on that. So everybody was so focused on getting back to reality, getting back to, our normal way of life. We don't want to wear masks. We don't, we want to be able to, you know, have our be able to walk to grocery stores and have our packages delivered with us not having to Lysol everything down. We we wanted our lives back so badly that it's like, okay, but during that period of time, like, you also had other things going on where bills are being signed and passed, and people are like, wait, when did that happen? I was like, oh, that was during the pandemic. I don't remember that. Well, that's because we were so focused on the war against COVID. So I think that's kind of what happened in Star Wars, which was Palpatine kind of set up. He knew he needed something to distract people, and as far as galaxy wide, but it also divided the Jedi's resources.
Right, and it's also
And
the false flag thing, right? It's like you create an
mhm,
enemy to
yep,
create a threat so you could fire up the war machine, and
mhm,
then as soon as you achieve your objective, that mysterious enemy goes away. And this is actually a
mhm,
really good segue into the who's the real villain then. Because at the top of the show, I did tease this about a friend of mine basically had posted this, and it was a quick post, so it probably could have been done more eloquently. But he says, first you had the Galactic Republic, right? Tax on trade, cloning humans for war, child soldiers, and a state-sponsored cult. That'd be the Jedi. And then, of course, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, or the Separatists, have free trade, a military that does not utilize sentient life, the dissolution of a galactic monopoly and political power. And, they always say, right, that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Everybody's probably heard that
mhm,
one. And so the idea, and what really the answer, because I don't know, maybe you feel differently, but I feel the definitive answer is that a lot of it, well, actually, one of my friends at work, Adam, we were talking
mhm,
about it, and, his whole thing was he felt that, while that assessment is true, a lot of it had to do with bureaucratic ineptitude more than a malicious kind of a thing. And so I would factor that in along with the fact that Palpatine was the malicious force. He was driving all this stuff because what was the end goal? Was to create an empire by which he was the head. No more
mhm.
democracy, right? And so, yeah, he steered toward that. And what was interesting was he even manipulated the Jedi completely into into these things where they were committing these actions that could be looked at a couple of different ways depending on how you spin it propaganda wise. And so when you actually know, because we the audience can see what the Jedi were trying to do, you understand that they were railroaded into a lot of this stuff. But if you're from the outside looking in, you're like, oh yeah, they're trying to take over or whatever. So, and then of course we see the Separatists in a different light too, because a lot of that point has come up where, we've seen a little bit from Tales of the Jedi, a little bit from Andor, where you see these former Separatists and what they were really trying to do. They were caught up in Palpatine's plan just as much as anybody else.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you also have to look at what was the galaxy like before the war.
Yeah.
See, you have the whole, okay, well, the tax trade, and it's like, oh, okay, well, you can talk about the bureaucracy of it all, but what was it like okay, prior to all of this? Because if everything was fine and everybody was, settling things, diplomatically, there is no villain.
Well,
You just
that's
have
because,
normal
and that's,
you have normal
but the
just government,
question, right? No, you're absolutely right, and I agree. But the question was during the prequel era, who was it? Were they the? And the answer, in a roundabout way, is kinda because Palpatine was the one doing it. I mean, obviously, you go, he's the actual villain, right? But I mean, if
right.
you look at how the Republic was starting to morph itself, and just how that's why I was saying the whole bureaucratic, ineptitude was probably really more what was happening, more so than them being a villain per se. It was kind of like Palpatine was being the villain, and because a lot of the bureaucratic squabbling, it just started to fall apart, and of course they couldn't fight back. And by the time they figured out what was going on, it was way too late for that. And that also goes into your point, by the way, too, because by creating the war, it began to distract them. So nobody really knew what was going on. Everybody was all caught up in defending themselves against this seemingly crazy enemy. Well, it's interesting. You know who's joined us again? Voyager.
Ah.
Yeah, Voyager's back. He says, I love the prequels. Voyager always is. As far as Ronaldo's not here defending it too. They've always been good. I was 9 when the Phantom Menace came out. Saw it with my whole family, including my grandpa. All right, so see, now that's that's interesting because now that's another generation. That's probably more like the third generation. This would be the generation that would be where I was at the original trilogy.
And that's where I was when I first saw the original. So I was like in that midway point between.
Yeah, you're the second generation. You're the guy that came in like kind of after me. I would count anybody that came in to Star Wars, like say from 86, 87, like far enough away from when Return of the Jedi was in theaters. Right? Because I'm actually counting that first generation from people like me that were right there, seeing A New Hope before it was even called A New Hope in theaters, all the way up to, maybe a year or two after Return of the Jedi came out. They were still kind of in that original trilogy era. Then you had people that were coming in more the second generation, which would be late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there where, okay, you have the original trilogy on VHS, you have the books, you're starting to get into it, and of course, that's when you're now in high school, basically, about to see the Phantom Menace. Third generation are the people where the Phantom Menace was kind of like their A New Hope.
New Hope.
They're like single-digit age, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, being just amazed and blown away, much like I was back in 77. So that's kind of like that third generation. That's what really makes this interesting, is that the longer that this goes on, you have, people coming in. This is another reason why the fan base, I think, has gotten a little weird. I mean, look, we all know it's because of Disney's missteps. I mean, that's no question about that, right? However, what doesn't help is this franchise has been around so long that when they say, okay, we're going to cater to the fans, well, who's that? Because when you got people coming in at different times, you basically have people wanting different things.
Yeah, which fans are you talking to?
Right. Because, Star Wars was always made for kids, right? Each generation has their own kids. I mean, technically, if you went by Lucas's thing, the current generation of fans should be like 10, so, and that's who you should be making it for. The problem is, that was great back then because we were all 10. Even though it was a cultural thing, right? I mean, people that were 50 were into it. But the point is, and that's why I say that they should go back to the style of the original trilogy, because if you really stop and think about it, that really encompassed all age groups. I mean, sure, it was slanted toward kids, and that's who Lucas basically made it for, but it appealed to people of all ages because of its timelessness and because of its overall message. And it was done in a very entertaining way. So I mean, I think that that's really ultimately how it works out. So I don't know what you think. I mean, after all this, when we look
had
at
some good discussion today.
We did, man, and we had some great chats today too, man. Everybody was active today. We had a Twitch person chatting in, which was awesome. We hope Voss VA. We hope you come back and chat some more with some of our stuff.
Yeah, come check us out Friday.
Yeah, check us out Friday, probably. I mean, I know our schedule has been a little fluid lately, but absolutely. But I think that looking back now, wrapping this up, now that we've had 25 years since the Phantom Menace, and you might as well say the entire. We talk about the Phantom Menace because that's what's playing in theaters right now, but really, we could just say the prequel trilogy. Overall, it's like kind of a final thought. Where do you think we're at?
I think the prequel. I mean, I think the Phantom Menace is. I think it's finally earned its due, much like another Phantom Menace character, Jar Jar Binks, played by Ahmad Best. Like, I think people are starting to appreciate the um the challenge, because and that's exactly what it is. It's such a challenge to follow something so iconic.
Yep.
It's hard for Michael Jackson to follow up Thriller with Bad. It's hard for that to happen. But I think it did what it was supposed to do. It set and that's why I have to look at like the intent. Like, did it succeed in what it was designed for? And I can say with a clear mind and a pure heart that it did. It told the story of Anakin Skywalker, how he was discovered. It told the story of how the war even began. It gave us the backdrop. It gave us cool characters for us to fall in love with. It gave us good action. And yes, there were problems, but overall, like it did its job.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with a lot of that stuff. I mean, yeah, sure, Jar Jar still bugs me, but
Sure.
honestly, what you could do is you can look at it now, all these years later, and you could really appreciate the story, especially in the context of everything else now.
Mm-hmm.
And look, they're still making prequel stuff. I mean, the Acolyte was mentioned, but you have the whole High Republic era, right? So and I think that's really going to start to frame the Phantom Menace even more, because now you're getting a little bit of stuff being made that's sort of on the back end of that, right? It's a prequel to the prequels. And I think it's important to note, like you said, that there was a challenge in following up the original trilogy. And I think that even though there were some issues, overall, if you look at the story and you look at what that's given us, I mean, I think that it holds up pretty well. In fact, in some ways, I think it holds up better now than it did then. Again, I wish they had taken Jar Jar out. I'm really happy that Ahmad Best, I keep forgetting his character's name, but I'm so glad they created an actual Jedi character for him to play.
Mm-hmm.
That was really, really cool. That was really great to see. It was heartwarming. He really appreciated that his contribution to the Star Wars universe, although arguably is going to be most well known for being Jar Jar Binks, because I remember that name.
Mm-hmm.
But
oh, yes.
But then again, we haven't actually seen enough of his Jedi character yet. So, there's always that. But it was great to see that. And also, I think if you go back and you look at, just the creation of Padme, you look at Obi-Wan back then. Now, granted, one of the things that you and I have also said is that it would have been a little bit better, I think, if episode 2 had been episode 1, and then episode 2, if it had been like a whole Clone War thing. Just like tell a compelling story during the Clone Wars. I think that would have been a little bit better. And they could have even done something where, they took care of it in the crawl or something. I don't know if we really needed to see like a 10-year-old Anakin, really. Again, I'm not critical necessarily of it. I mean, I think that there was enough of a story there that it did work out, especially because we know, as we talked about on yesterday's show, at length actually, about how they got Jedi as little kids, babies in a lot of cases. I mean, Anakin was even considered too old, really. I mean, we all thought that Luke was too old. They're over there going, yeah, I don't know, man, you're kind of old and you're, you're a little angry and I don't know. You might be an issue, and of course they were correct. But yeah, I think it's really cool. I think it's great. All right, so what were we going to talk about Friday? What was something we were going to do for Friday? Oh, the Tales of the Empire. So Tales of the Empire dropped also on Saturday, this past Saturday. It was a pretty busy weekend for Star Wars, actually. So as well as maybe this week, trying to check out the Phantom Menace in theaters, you can also, if you haven't done so already, just binge all of Tales of the Empire, because they did all 6 episodes. So here's how we're going to handle this. This Friday, we're going to, instead of doing like 1 episode at a time like we did Tales of the Jedi, because they're short, they're only like 14 to 19 minutes long, episodes 1 through 3 basically deals with Morgan Elsbeth's story, and then episodes 4 through 6 deals with Barriss Offee. So what we're going to do is this Friday, probably Friday. I always have to say that because every time I do, like, yep, see you Friday at 11. It's like, okay, hello on a Sunday, that kind of thing. But we're going to review episodes 1 through 3. We're going to do the Morgan Elsbeth story this Friday. And then a week from Friday, we'll do the Barriss Offee one. And that's how we're going to handle that. And then we have a bunch of ideas for shows for the next few Mondays. Maybe I'll do what I've done before. I'll put a poll up. I'll give you guys all the topics that, we're planning on covering. This is on YouTube, by the way. So if you are watching on Twitch, because like I said, we actually have some people on Twitch watch us. They don't usually chat, but they do watch us. If you are on Twitch, head over to the YouTube community tab on our channel, Head to Head, Star Wars podcast, and you can participate in the poll there. So we'll see where we're gonna go for the next couple of Mondays. But yeah, this was a great discussion. We really appreciate you guys checking it out. Please hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't yet done so, because I don't have to tell you guys. You watch YouTube. You know every channel in the world is telling you to like and subscribe. And the reason for that is because it really does help the channel. And if you want to help us out even further, buymeacoffee.com. We actually call it Buy Me a Blue Milk, right? Because we got to make this Star Wars. Check out the link in the description. You can go to the site. You can either, just give us a couple bucks or whatever, or you can actually become a member, and there are some member benefits. And then Oh, go ahead.
Speaking of which, do you know they're selling the actual blue milk?
Yes.
In grocery stores?
Yes, I saw that. I was cracking up. I saw that the other day that I think it started this past...
Star Wars. Yeah,
another thing that started this past weekend, yeah. I did.
Yeah.
I was actually tempted to buy one so I can hold it up and be like, buy us some blue milk. But, just our luck, they'd find out... Yeah, we'd get... Exactly. We'd get a bunch
of cases of blue milk.
Yeah. It's like, blue milk doesn't work on us. Only money.
Yes.
We like the green kind of blue. The green milk, like, that's what Luke was drinking for The Last Jedi, right? Should probably have changed that.
Blue. No,
was it blue? Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if it isn't, we'll hear about it in the comments. All right. So with that, we will see you probably Friday at 11. And with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.